Real Talk with Raff.
Hi, I'm Susan Raff, and welcome to Real Talk. We have a lot to talk about today. The world of politics is exploding. There is so much going on, I think it's hard for many people to really focus. We had an attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump right before the Republican National Convention. Republicans are more united than ever. President Joe Biden, his numbers are going down in many states. Internal polls show he is losing ground. Can he turn things around? With us today is Bilal Sekou, who is a political science professor at the University of Hartford, one of my favorite people. He knows a lot, and there's just so much to talk about. So with that, the attempted assassination, that really came as a surprise to a lot of people, but then again, the world is very violent now, so maybe not.
I mean, the world is violent. If you look at this as a global kind of issue, though, the levels of political violence around the world has certainly been going up, and we're seeing incidents in which people who are running for public office where there have been assassination attempts, and so that's made its way back to the United States. Certainly, you know, since 2016 at least, we've seen a ratcheting up of, you know, the kind of language that's being used where violence is being alluded to or even outright, you know, talked about. And so at one level, it isn't a surprise, but it's something that you wish would not happen here in the U.S.
Republicans are more united than ever. They are at the National Convention in Milwaukee. The former President Trump is going to be speaking on Thursday. He has announced a running mate, J.D. Vance, a very young man. 39 years old, one term as a senator. Is that right?
Right, yep.
He went from being the most staunch critic of President Trump to now a MAGA movement supporter.
Right. And certainly one of the things you've seen is that a number of people who were very strong, you know, dissenters and really opposed to Donald Trump being president, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and certainly J.D. Vance, now are, as you said, united behind the Trump, you know, candidacy. And Vance at 39 years of age is certainly one of the youngest, if not probably the youngest, you know, nominees for vice president. He has less than 2 years experience in the U.S. Senate. Before that, he was a book author and toured and gave, you know, speeches. And so it isn't the kind of path to be a heartbeat away from the White House that we would normally expect of a candidate.
No, but a calculated move probably on Trump and his party to have someone as an heir apparent.
Right. And obviously, you know, Vance grew up in Appalachia. He's someone who has written about, in his book Hillbilly Elegy, he's written about the sort of pain of working class whites in rural and poor areas, which is an important part of Trump's base that he would like to bring in, which will be key in some of the battleground states like Pennsylvania, for example. And so my thinking is that the idea is that Vance can help him in those places like Pennsylvania, that voters from those rural areas that can sort of get Trump the votes he needs to win those states, you know, that Vance will be key to that.
I don't want to spend too much time on Nikki Haley, although I had the chance to meet her when I was in New Hampshire, but right now she is a non-factor.
Right.
And I think, you know, certainly she was not chosen to be on the ticket, right. But she is now supporting Donald Trump at a time when she really spoke very negatively about him on the campaign trail. A lot of Connecticut Republicans supported her. I met them in New Hampshire. They really wanted her to do better, and they are disappointed. They won't say it publicly with her endorsement of Trump, but she will get their voters to endorse Trump, no doubt.
I mean, and she gave probably one of the strongest endorsements of Trump, you know, at the convention. And so, you know, clearly this is someone, as you said, will probably disappoint a lot of the people who were in that base who were, you know, very opposed to the idea of Donald Trump. They don't like the tone, they don't like the policies, and yet, you know, now Nikki Haley, who I think has been one of the most coherent sort of critics of Trump, you know, going back to 2016, she is now on board and gave a strong endorsement of the former president.
Let's talk about the Democrats and Joe Biden. I think everyone was a bit disheartened by the debate that we saw.
Right.
And internal polls now show that that debate has really cost Joe Biden. In 14 states, he is losing ground, doesn't have the momentum, and they're not necessarily swing states.
Right.
And that could hurt Democrats running for Senate. So can Joe Biden and the Democrats turn this around?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that's really important to understand is that the worry about whether Joe Biden would be a good candidate for re-election started well before the debate. And so in many ways, the debate really confirmed the worry that a number of people in the party had about, whether he was declining in his ability to be able to govern. And so, Joe Biden clearly has decided he's going to stay in this race. He's not going to drop out. There's been
Would he have been better dropping out 8 or 9 months ago? I think a lot of people have talked about that. Do you think that would have helped the party or hurt it?
I mean, certainly if he dropped out 8 or 9 months ago, then we wouldn't be having this discussion. What I wonder about, though, is if not Joe Biden, then who? I'm not certain that anyone in the party really has the support. Even the vice president doesn't have the kind of support that you would need to really excite the base and to bring people to the polls. Certainly Biden's situation has been made worse by the conflict in Gaza, which has, eroded his support in places like Michigan, which is a key battleground state. Lots of young people have latched onto that issue as well, and so that's eroded his support there. Certainly there are a lot of questions in the black community about promises, campaign promises that have not been completely fulfilled, and so people are concerned. They look at the George Floyd legislation that failed. They look at, some of the other promises that were made, student loan debt relief that would be much more substantial. Of course, if you're not someone who pays close attention to the politics, you don't really know about the role that the courts play. You don't know about the role that Joe Manchin played and other things that really undermine that agenda. And so Biden has an uphill battle to try to secure a victory, re-election victory. But I will say this. I think that what will be key to that, though, will be what he's able to do in the black community. And so if you look at a place like Pennsylvania, turnout in Pittsburgh, turnout in Philadelphia needs to be high. In order for Democrats to win, they can't just get the normal amount of turnout from black voters and Latino voters. They really need a higher than normal rate of return. And Michigan is the same way with Wayne County, where Detroit is at.
Right, so Democrats have always counted on people of color in the cities to push them to the finish line. But there's no question that President Biden has a lot of work to do in the African American community. What does he need to do, and why do people not like Kamala Harris?
Yeah, well, one, the first part of the question about what he needs to do, without a doubt, the surrogates need to play a much more prominent role. And so you need to see, obviously, Kamala Harris get out there. There are a lot of black women in particular and women of color who really like her. I think some of her challenges for males of color, for example, is there. And there are liberals in the party who really don't trust her because of, when she was Attorney General and also of California and her work in San Francisco, especially around criminal justice issues. And so she's got to get out there. She's been a strong, supporter of abortion rights, and a lot of people really appreciated what she's had to say and the way she has talked about that issue. So surrogates like her, people like Barack Obama, who will be, I think, probably Biden's most important surrogate if he gets out there and he really stomps around the country, for him and other leaders of the party. And so Biden can't do this on his own. He's 81 years old. He doesn't have the stamina. Let's just be real about that. He's prone to gaffes. The media are hypersensitive. If he mistakenly confuses the president of Gambia with the president of Nigeria, the press will go crazy and complain about this is why China is ahead of us in Africa and other parts of the world. And if Donald Trump stands up and says he remembers meeting King T'Challa of Wakanda, the media will just say, hey, that's Donald Trump being Donald Trump, and his surrogates will come out and say he made a joke. And so Biden has a real high bar right now to jump over, and I think he's got to get out there also. He's got to do more of those one-on-one meetings with reporters. He's got to do more press conferences. He needs to get out there and speak. He needs to demonstrate that he has a command of the issues and that he knows how to do the work for the next 4 years.
I want to focus on something that you said, and Kamala Harris has been to Connecticut, and I know that she, has been working hard to encourage people, especially women, to understand what's happened with the Supreme Court and Roe v. Wade. And I want to focus on the Supreme Court. There's no question the overturning of Roe v. Wade maybe is not being felt as hard here in Connecticut, where Connecticut protects that right, but in Texas and other states where women can't even, they're having a miscarriage, and it's really, it's horrendous for a lot of people to understand that. Now, if Justices Alito and Thomas retire and Trump is reelected, he could and will replace them with conservative justices. J.D. Vance, his running mate selection, has already said that he is anti-abortion and supports a national ban. Should people all over be concerned about that, especially places like Connecticut and other blue states where they've not really had to worry so much about that because they have legislatures that support that?
Yeah, I absolutely think that if Republicans remain and gain control of the Senate and hold on to the House and Donald Trump is in the White House, you will see national legislation to ban abortion. And I think, certainly what we've seen from this high court is that the likelihood of success at the high court level is also very real as well. And so you have this situation where if Donald Trump is reelected, more than likely both Thomas and Alito are into their 70s and would like to step down with the Republican in office, which would give Trump an opportunity to appoint 2 more justices to the Supreme Court, 2 justices that are likely to be young as well, probably in their 40s, who will literally be on the court for decades and shaping, policies. So I think, again, that's a really critical issue. And to close this thought, one of the things I read the other day, about 54% of black women live in states that either have completely banned abortion rights or have severely restricted them. And so again, this is one of those issues that if Harris gets out there, if others get out there and really talk about this issue, that may galvanize some support for Biden.
Right, and I think one of the things that myself and other voters, are concerned about is that Americans sometimes have a short-term memory, right? So sometimes, and or maybe think, well, I don't need an abortion, I don't know anyone, so it doesn't apply to me. But it's such a bigger issue than that. And the underlying thing is that Republicans who have really pushed hard, saying, less government. This is more government interference in somebody's life. It's the complete opposite.
Exactly. And and to be honest, there's a lot of stigma still attached to anyone who acknowledges that they had an abortion. And so, there are a lot of women out there, I think, and men who I think understand the importance of this issue. But again, it's not one that you necessarily advertise that, you've either had done or, or you're in favor of. But I think, certainly with the Dobbs decision, more people have come out, more prominent figures have come out and said that, they've had to do this. And just think about in vitro fertilization, the same situation. I mean, I was amazed at the number of women that came out and said, my family is here because of the fact that, I had that done.
I think this is one of those issues where the actions of Congress do not reflect the will of the people. Most people.
And the courts on this issue as well. I mean, most people in the country favor abortion rights. We can debate about under what circumstances, but nothing like what people are pushing. J.D. Vance even made a comment about rape and incest that, 2 wrongs don't make a right in terms of abortion for rape or incest. And so, clearly he is someone who will be on board if there is a push for a national ban on abortion rights.
What about term limits? Term limits for the Supreme Court. President Biden this week has talked about having term limits. It's not a new conversation. It sounds a little that, concerning, because if former President Trump does get elected, the court could very well change again. So progressive Democrats seem to support that. Is that really viable? Is that something that lawmakers in Washington will embrace?
In the current political moment, probably not viable. I mean, to be honest, you need 60 votes in the Senate in order to make that happen, and you need control of the House of Representatives to make that happen. But I think the conversation is there, and it's a real conversation, and it's a real concern about a court that appears to be out of step with the American people, not just on abortion rights, but a large number of kinds of issues. The sort of perception of the court being sort of this umpire who just calls balls and strikes, I think for many people today, that perception is just not there anymore. People see that this court appears to have its thumb on the scale. And so I think, some court reform is something that you may see more and more people in the public start to demand. And perhaps that will move lawmakers, but it's a stretch right now because one side sees this as an important sort of way of legislating from the bench in a way that our legislative process now fails to be able to do. And so if the court gets these cases and are able to make a judgment, and certainly people like Alito and Thomas are very comfortable with making policy from the court, then certainly reforming the court will be an uphill battle, to say the least.
I want to focus on Connecticut and Connecticut voters. As you know, the largest voting bloc are independents. And I hear all the time from people that they're really, they just don't know who they're going to vote for. How will that affect Connecticut voters? There are a lot of young people who I've spoken to who really feel that President Biden and his mental acuity is not where it should be, and they don't want to vote for him. They may not be necessarily Trump supporters, right. But there are only two options, really. Yeah. I mean, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big worry, and especially when you think about the way in which Democratic lawmakers came out and really encouraged Biden to step down, was their worry about down ticket voting. And so, if young people are out there saying we're not excited about Joe Biden, the real worry is not that they'll vote for Donald Trump, that they just won't show up on Election Day. If black voters are not excited because of the record of non-accomplishment that they had expected, the real worry is that they don't show up. They don't show up in Pennsylvania, they don't show up in Michigan, they don't show up, people of color in places like Arizona and other places where, especially battleground states or places where there are some key legislative races. That's the worry. And control of state legislatures, again, if turnout is low, that again is the worry. Control of state elective offices that are occurring anywhere, that's the worry. And so I think a lot of this is about the down ticket, in addition to the top, because the national polls show that this race is still quite close. I think you're right that there are a lot of state polls that are showing, that this is swinging, but, sometimes within the margins. And the real question will be, can Biden close that or maybe achieve victory? And again, I just think the key is turnout. The key will be the ground game to turn out people, to turn out young people. And I think as we get closer and closer to the election, people will, and both sides, will begin to frame this in a way in terms of, if this person wins, what will be the cost to us as a nation, both on the right and on the left. And I think that means that people interest may increase. The Democrats have time with their convention coming, later to try to frame. The Republicans are likely to get a bump coming out of this convention, which is normal for the party that has their convention to get a bump. The question will be, will Democrats go into their convention divided, bickering, still worried about whether Biden is their candidate and should run? If they go in like that, then this may be a landslide victory for Donald Trump in November.
I think what's really interesting about this election, in many ways, obviously, I think a state like Connecticut, Democrats just assume, well, Connecticut doesn't matter because, it's a blue state and Democrats are going to vote for the Democratic candidate. But I think Democrats and independents here in Connecticut are perplexed. I think they really have some soul searching to do. Do they vote for a candidate? Do they vote for a principal party? It's going to be very tough, I think, for a lot of voters in Connecticut.
I mean, it's been interesting to see just the contrast between the way in which Republicans have lined up behind Donald Trump versus the way in which Democrats have done Joe Biden. I've said to people that if Trump had an awful first debate, Republicans would have come out and said Joe Biden didn't capitalize on this weak performance, and so Donald Trump really won. this thing. Fox News would have said, look, this was bad. The questions were biased because it was CNN. They would have framed this in a way. And to be honest, I was a bit shocked by the avalanche of criticism of Joe Biden and the unwillingness to try to explain away some of this and to really say, hey, bad night, this is our guy, we think he can still win. I think the other difficulty was the media's reaction to it as well. I mean, I remember looking at my feed of the New York Times and the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal, and I'd never seen anyone get blasted. I don't remember even Donald Trump being blasted the way they blasted Joe Biden. Articles, opinion pieces, innuendo. I mean, it was just a mountain of critical media coverage of Joe Biden for several weeks, and that will be hard for him to recover from, I think.
Right, and somehow all those criminal convictions of Donald Trump have just gone
vanished. Yeah. And of course, I mean, Monday he got a gift, with the convention and Judge Cannon saying, hey, I'm tossing this out. And so, the timing of that from the Republican Party and Donald Trump was, perfect timing. And then, of course, the assassination attempt and the sympathy that builds for anyone who, someone attempts to take your life. But on top of that, his, moment where he stood there and threw his fist up and screamed, fight, 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 and I mean, all of those things, certainly provide momentum for the Republican convention. And the question is, what kind of a bump will he get coming out of this thing? And again, that's to be seen in terms of how voters decide. But I think the other thing about voters is that, one of the things about these two candidates, you're in either camp. You have really made your mind up. You made it up a long time ago. There really isn't a huge number of people in the middle that you can swing either way. But what will be key is if you can pull some of them in, particularly in battleground states because of our electoral college system. But I think at the same time, there are tons of people who, one, aren't even registered to vote, who say that they're not likely to vote. And so I think for Democrats and Republicans, but especially for Democrats, if Biden wants to be reelected, you've got to reach those people. People cannot wake up and say this election really doesn't matter and why vote. I think if that happens, it's going to be a disastrous night, I think in particular for Democrats.
How much of a factor is Kennedy? Is he a factor in this election?
I think he has sort of faded from the headlines. I think there are a number of people who, were really, perplexed by the response to COVID, who are very opposed to, receiving any kind of shots, And so I think there's an appeal, but I don't think it really swings. This isn't Ross Perot, so it's not that kind of a moment. But again, a few thousand votes in Pennsylvania or a few thousand votes in Michigan may in fact make the difference for who wins that state.
Who does he give votes to?
There's been a lot of debate about who he hurts and who he helps. And I'm not sure. I mean, I think, there's a case to be made that he can do damage to Joe Biden. But I think there's also a case to be made, especially for the anti-vaxxers, that this will affect Donald Trump. But I think as we get closer and closer to Election Day, many people will look at this election, look at what's at stake, and will probably say, I've got to decide on one of these two major party candidates. Yes, he's disappointed me on the environment. Yes, he didn't get all of the things I thought he should get. Yes, he says crazy things and sounds authoritarian, everyone, but I still got, I think that's what voters will be thinking on, as we get closer to Election Day.
And Donald Trump seems to be a little nicer to him lately. I'm not quite sure what that's about.
Yeah, and I think part of what Trump is trying to do, and I think he needs to do this, and this is what normally would happen, is that you try to pivot to the middle and try to bring in people from the middle. And I think he's finally listened to advice from people to do that. But if you listen to the speeches and the tone of this convention, it's still a very dark, nihilistic sort of tone from time to time. It's about America in decline, America, out of control, especially in urban areas, and how awful it's going to be if Joe Biden wins. And so I think the real question will be, which Donald Trump will we see when he gives his address? After the assassination attempt, he talked about how he threw out the speech he was going to give and he was going to present a different speech. It's Donald Trump. I wonder what that different speech will be.
I think for a lot of voters, though, they feel that this election is a sad commentary, right? And they feel, you know, with all the candidates and all the people out there, that it's just come to these two people.
Yeah, and you know, I've been one who have blamed the voters for this. I think, you know, when you think about 2016, there were more than 20, I think, candidates who ran for the Republican nomination. They gave it to Donald Trump. Joe Biden came in late. There were tons of people. Amy Klobuchar. There was, you know, I mean, it was a rich field of people who you could say are the future of the Democratic Party. They chose Joe Biden.
I think I even heard one poll say that people would rather Hillary Clinton come back, and that surprised me because people really did not like her at all.
Absolutely.
So I think people just want someone else, and it's going to be a difficult election.
But in many ways, it's the mood of the public. I mean, neither of these candidates, as you said, are particularly popular. I mean, it isn't like Joe Biden's numbers are in the basement and Donald Trump's are like, you know, going through the roof. I mean, these are two candidates that the people just don't like. And so I think once we get through this election, it will be interesting to see what the future looks like. There are a lot of much younger people in both parties that, you know, want, you know, national prestige, who are building a case that they are the future of both of their parties. And so I think this election will, you know, be the end of a certain kind of era, and I'm not clear what the next era will be, but I think we certainly are headed towards a new era.
So you're not expecting a landslide, but the stakes are high.
Yeah.
I mean it's 4 years.
Yeah. I mean, and again, landslide, electoral college, it could fall that way, but in terms of the popular vote, again, this thing is still close in many ways, but as we know, what really matters is the electoral college. And so at the end of the day, the person who wins could be Donald Trump, and he may or may not even receive a majority of the votes, you know, from the American people. But because of the way the Electoral College works, he can still win. And so that's why a state like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio and Arizona and Georgia are so, and Wisconsin are so critical, because again, if you win by one vote in those states, you get all of the Electoral College.
And votes. Donald Trump, if he wins, may not even accept the results of the election. So that, there really is.
Which would be really odd, because he did it in 2016. He didn't accept the results.
There's so much here. Thank you for joining us on Real Talk. I think it's going to be a tough election and we have about 30 seconds left. Anything that you want voters to know and people to know?
Well, you know, what I think, you know, what's really important is that democracy depends on the people being involved and engaged. Voting is one way in which you can become involved in the political system, but take advantage of all the other opportunities. Get out there and be good democratic citizens.
Thank you, Bilal Sakou, political science professor at the University of Hartford. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Real Talk, and we'll see you again real soon.